Everyone rejected this albino gorilla baby. What happened when King Gorilla saw him? The rain in the sanctuary did not wash things clean. It merely turned the world into a heavy, suffocating shade of gray. It beat against the corrugated metal roof of the great ape house, a relentless drumming that usually lulled the troop to sleep. But tonight, there was no sleep. Tonight, the straw in the birthing den was soaked not with rain, but with the amniotic fluids of a difficult labor and the heavy, metallic scent of fear. The universe, in its infinite and often cruel sense of irony, had decided to play a trick on the Nyamulagira troop. In the center of the nesting box, huddled against the massive, heaving chest of a mother named Kila, was a mistake. He was not a gorilla. At least, that is what the eyes of the troop told them. A gorilla is shadow. A gorilla is obsidian. A gorilla is the absence of light, designed to disappear into the deep verdant gloom of the jungle. But this thing, this tiny, trembling creature, was light itself. He was born with leucism. He was stark, blindingly white. His eyes were not the warm, dark amber of his kin. They were a piercing, crystalline blue, like chips of glacial ice. He looked like a ghost. He looked like a spirit that had forgotten to put on its skin. To the zoo administration, checking the remote cameras in the warm safety of their offices, the baby was a miracle. A white gorilla. The director shouted, spilling his coffee, "Do you know what this means? We'll be on the cover of National Geographic. We'll have lines to the parking lot. Name him Snow. Name him Cloud. Just keep him alive." But to Arthur, the 60-year-old keeper standing in the service corridor, watching through the wire mesh with tears in his eyes, the baby wasn't a miracle. He was a tragedy waiting to happen. Arthur knew the laws of the troop better than he knew the laws of his own country. He knew that in the binary code of the wild, different equals dangerous. Different attracts predators. Different gets the family killed. The tragedy began 4 hours after birth. Kila was a good mother. She had raised 3 infants before. But she was staring at the white bundle in her arms with a look of profound biological confusion. She sniffed him. He smelled like her. She touched him. He felt like her. But when she looked at him, her instincts screamed. The troop's silverback, a volatile 400-pound monarch named Brutus, paced the perimeter of the den. He did not like the white thing. He grunted, a sharp, staccato sound of warning. He slammed his fist against the wall. Get rid of it. Kila tried. God, she tried. She brought the baby to her breast. The infant, blind and desperate, latched on. For a moment, it seemed okay. But then Brutus charged. He didn't hit her, but he rushed the nest, screaming, tearing up a handful of straw and throwing it at the white infant. Kila flinched. She looked at the king. She looked at the baby. The pressure was absolute. If she kept the baby, she risked the wrath of the silverback. She risked being cast out. Slowly, with a whimper that broke Arthur's heart, Kila unpeeled the baby's fingers from her fur. The infant shrieked, a high, thin sound of terror. Kila pushed him away. She stood up. She walked to the other side of the enclosure, sat down, and turned her back. The white baby lay alone in the straw, a single snowflake in the mud, shivering as the cold began to set in. Arthur intervened. He had to. He initiated the emergency separation protocol, distracting Brutus with high-pressure hoses while he unlocked the service door and scooped the white infant into a towel. The baby was cold. He was lighter than he looked. Arthur ran to the nursery, his boots squeaking on the linoleum. For the next 3 months, the baby, whom Arthur named Ghost, lived in a glass box. The nursery was sterile. It was safe, it was warm, and it was the loneliest place on earth. Ghost was fed by bottles. He was wrapped in blankets. He was watched by thousands of people who pressed their faces against the nursery window, cooing and taking pictures. "Look at him." They cheered. "He's so cute. He's like a little yeti." They bought plush toys, they bought ghost t-shirts. The zoo made millions. But Arthur saw the truth. Ghost was dying. Not physically. He was gaining weight. His heart was strong, but his soul was withering. Gorillas are not solitary creatures. They are made of touch. They are made of the deep, rumbling vibrations of the troop. They need the rough grooming of a father and the warm weight of a mother. Ghost spent his days sitting in the corner of his incubator, rocking back and forth. He sucked his thumb until it was raw. When Arthur held him, Ghost would cling with a desperate, bruising grip, burying his face in Arthur's neck, searching for the musk of a gorilla that wasn't there. "He has failure to thrive," the vet said, checking the charts. "His cortisol levels are through the roof. He's depressed, Arthur. If we don't get him with his own kind, he's going to just—" "Stop! We can't put him back with Brutus," Arthur said, his voice raspy. "Brutus will kill him. The females rejected him. No other zoo wants him because their silverbacks will see him as a rival or a freak." "Then he stays in the box," the vet said, closing the folder. "It's the only way." Arthur looked at the white baby, who was staring at the fluorescent lights with empty blue eyes. "No," Arthur whispered. "There is one other option." The Shadow Ward was the nickname for the geriatric enclosure at the far end of the primate sector. It was a quiet place, shaded by old oak trees, far away from the screaming crowds. It was the home of Samson. Samson was 45 years old, ancient for a gorilla. In his prime, he had been a legend. He was the largest silverback the zoo had ever housed, a gentle giant who had sired 20 offspring. But time is a thief that spares no one. Samson was dying. His kidneys were failing. His joints were locked with arthritis. But the cruelest blow had been to his eyes. Cataracts had claimed his vision 2 years ago. He was stone blind. He lived in a world of darkness. He moved slowly, navigating his enclosure by touch and smell. He spent his days sitting in a patch of sunlight, listening to the birds, waiting for the end. He was solitary because the younger males bullied him, sensing his weakness. Arthur walked into the Shadow Ward. Samson turned his massive, graying head. His eyes were milky white, unseeing. He let out a low, welcoming rumble. He knew Arthur's step. He knew Arthur's smell, coffee and peppermint soap. "Hey, old man," Arthur whispered, sitting on the other side of the mesh. Samson reached out a finger and touched the wire. Arthur had a crazy idea, an idea that could get him fired, an idea that could get the baby killed. Samson couldn't see. To Samson, a gorilla wasn't a color. A gorilla was a smell. A gorilla was a heartbeat. A gorilla was a sound. If Brutus rejected Ghost because he saw a freak, maybe Samson would accept him because he couldn't see the difference. Maybe the blind king could save the invisible prince. The director called it insanity. The insurance company called it high-risk liability. Arthur called it hope. It took Arthur 2 weeks to convince them. Finally, desperate because Ghost had stopped eating, they agreed. The introduction took place on a Tuesday morning. The zoo was closed. The veterinary team stood by with tranquilizer rifles, terrified. Arthur carried Ghost into the Shadow Ward. The baby was trembling. He had never been this close to an adult male. The smell of Samson, musky, potent, ancient, filled the air. Arthur placed Ghost in the straw, 10 feet away from where the blind giant was sleeping. "Okay, Samson," Arthur whispered into his radio, signaling the release of the lock. "He's all yours." Arthur backed out and locked the door. He stood by the glass, his heart hammering against his ribs. Ghost sat in the straw. He was a beacon of white light in the gloomy enclosure. He saw the mountain of fur in the corner. He gave a tiny, frightened whimper. Samson's ears twitched. The old silverback lifted his head. He sniffed the air. He smelled the milk. He smelled the baby powder from the... But underneath that, he smelled the undeniable scent of gorilla. Samson stood up. His movements were stiff, painful. He walked on his knuckles, swaying slightly, testing the air. He moved toward the sound. Ghost froze. He had genetic memories of what a silverback could do. He squeezed his eyes shut and curled into a ball, waiting for the blow. Samson reached the baby. He loomed over him, a 400-pound tower of darkness over a 10-pound speck of light. Samson reached out his hand. The vets raised their rifles. "Steady," Arthur hissed. "Steady." Samson's hand, leathery and scarred, brushed Ghost's shoulder. Ghost flinched. Samson paused. He didn't strike. He lowered his face. He inhaled deeply, his nose touching the white fur. He couldn't see the white. He couldn't see the blue eyes. He couldn't see the anomaly. He just smelled a baby, a terrified, lonely baby who needed a father. Samson let out a sound that broke Arthur's composure. It was a belch grunt, the sound of deep contentment. The giant lay down. He curled his massive body around the white speck. He gently nudged Ghost with his chin. Ghost opened his eyes. He looked at the milky eyes of the old king. He didn't see aggression. He saw peace. Slowly, tentatively, Ghost reached out and grabbed a handful of Samson's silver hair. He pulled himself closer. He buried his face in the silverback's chest. Samson let out a sigh that deflated his entire body. He rested his heavy hand on top of the baby, shielding him. The rifles were lowered. The vets were wiping their eyes. The blind king had found his vision. For the next 6 months, the Shadow Ward became a sanctuary of magic. Ghost thrived. He grew rapidly, fueled by the confidence that comes from having a protector. He was a mischievous spirit. He would climb over Samson's head. He would slide down Samson's back. He would bite Samson's toes. Samson, who had been waiting to die, suddenly found a reason to live. His movement improved. He played, gently wrestling with the white demon who tormented him with love. Because Samson was blind, he taught Ghost a different way to be a gorilla. He taught him to listen. He taught him to feel the vibrations of the earth. When Ghost played, he was quieter than other gorillas. He moved like smoke. Arthur watched them every day. He saw the way Samson would panic if Ghost moved too far away, groping the air until Ghost ran back and touched his hand. "I am here, Papa. I am here." It was the happiest time of Arthur's career, but he knew it was borrowed time. Samson's kidneys were failing. The old king was running on love, but his engine was breaking down. And then the storm came. It was a hurricane-force storm, a rarity for the region. The wind howled like a banshee, tearing branches from the oaks. The power grid failed. The zoo was plunged into darkness. In the confusion, a catastrophic mechanical failure occurred. The hydraulic system that separated the enclosures lost pressure. The emergency locks failed. The gate between the main troop, Brutus's troop, and the Shadow Ward slowly drifted open. Arthur was in the Keeper's Lodge when the alarm sounded. Gate failure. Sector 4. He grabbed his flashlight and ran into the rain. He knew what was happening. He knew Brutus. Brutus had smelled the intruder for months. He had smelled the white freak living next door. He hated it. It was an affront to his dominance. When Arthur reached the viewing glass, his flashlight beam cut through the dark. Brutus was in the shadow ward. The massive, prime silverback had crossed the threshold. He was screaming, tearing up the sod, displaying his power. He wanted the baby. Samson was standing in the center of the enclosure. He couldn't see the enemy, but he could hear him. He could smell the testosterone and the rage. Ghost was cowering behind Samson's legs, shivering. Brutus roared, a sonic boom of aggression. He charged. Arthur screamed, banging on the glass, trying to distract him. But Brutus was locked on. Samson didn't run. He couldn't run. He was old. He was blind. He was sick. But he was a king. As Brutus collided with him, Samson didn't buckle. He met the charge with a roar of his own, a ragged, ancient sound that spoke of 1,000 battles past. The fight was brutal and short. Brutus was younger, faster, and sighted. He landed blow after blow, biting Samson's arm, hammering his chest. Samson took it. He took every hit. He didn't fight to win. He fought to hold the line. He kept his body positioned perfectly between the attacker and the white baby. He was a shield of flesh and bone. He grappled with Brutus, using his weight to pin the younger male for a precious few seconds. "Run!" Arthur screamed, though he knew they couldn't understand. But Ghost understood. He saw his father bleeding. He saw the wall of black fur holding back the monster. Ghost didn't run away. He ran up. He scrambled up the artificial tree in the corner of the ward, climbing higher than the heavy silverbacks could reach. He reached the safety of the rafters. Samson heard the scratch of claws on wood. He heard the baby reach safety. That was all he needed. Samson stopped fighting. He let go. Brutus, confused by the sudden surrender, landed one last blow, knocking the old giant to the ground. He stood over him, beating his chest, claiming victory. He looked up at the white ghost in the rafters, snarling. But he couldn't reach him. The storm was too loud, the tree too thin for his bulk. The emergency lights flickered on. The vet team burst in with dart guns. Brutus was sedated and dragged back to his enclosure. Arthur unlocked the door and ran into the mud. Samson was lying on his side. His breathing was wet and shallow. His body was broken. Arthur knelt beside him, weeping, indifferent to the rain soaking his uniform. "I'm sorry, old friend. I'm so sorry." Samson didn't seem to feel the pain. He lifted his head slightly. He turned his milky eyes toward the tree. He let out a soft, questioning grunt. "Who?" From the rafters, a white shape descended. Ghost climbed down. He walked past Arthur. He ignored the blood. He walked to Samson's face. The baby gorilla lay down next to the dying giant. He took Samson's heavy, limp hand and placed it on his own head. Samson's fingers twitched. He felt the fur. He felt the life. He let out one last, long exhale. The tension left his body. The old blind king died in the rain, his hand resting on the future. Grief is a heavy stone, but it is also a foundation. Ghost did not die of a broken heart this time. Samson had filled his cup. Samson had taught him that he was worthy of love. The zoo tried to move Ghost to another facility, but Arthur refused. "He stays," Arthur said. "This is his home." They introduced Ghost to a gentle female from another zoo, an older matriarch who had no prejudices. She adopted him. Years passed. The legend of the white gorilla grew, but the people who came to see him noticed something strange. Atlas was now a massive silverback. His fur was still a shocking, spectral white. He was the most beautiful animal in the world. But when he moved, he didn't move like a normal gorilla. He moved with a slow, deliberate grace. He would often close his blue eyes and tilt his head, listening to the wind, feeling the vibrations of the earth. He was mimicking his father, and he was kind. When new infants were born into his troop, black infants, normal infants, Atlas was gentle. He was the most patient father the zoo had ever seen. Arthur, now retired and walking with a cane, would come to visit every Sunday. He would stand by the glass. Atlas would see him. The massive White King would walk over to the window. He would sit down. He would press his hand against the glass. He would look at Arthur with those piercing blue eyes, but Arthur knew who was really looking back. In the tilt of the head, in the gentleness of the hand, in the quiet dignity of the posture, Arthur saw him. He saw Samson. The blind king was not dead. He lived on in the movements of the ghost he had saved. And Arthur would smile, tears tracking through the wrinkles of his face, and whisper the truth that the world was just beginning to learn. Love is the only thing that is never blind. It is the only thing that truly sees. If you found this story of survival, connection, and the incredible bond between a blind king and a rejected prince moving, please consider checking out our shop to support our mission. We have posters, notebooks, and hoodies that help us stay independent and ad-free. And if you haven't already, please do like and subscribe. It really helps the channel grow and ensures we can keep bringing you stories that matter. Thank you for watching.